Alexander III of Macedon, more well known as Alexander the Great, passed away at Babylon on the night of June 10/11, 323 BC. He was 32 years old. During his lifetime, he had established one of the biggest empires the world had ever seen, an empire that might be said to have theoretically extended from Greece to the Punjab and from Egypt to Samarkand. However, in the wake of his passing, there was a collapse of the imperial system. Almost immediately after Alexander's passing, problems started cropping up across his realm. Around 48 hours after Alexander passed away, Babylon was engulfed in savage unrest as Macedonian troops and generals battled over the succession. Within a few weeks of Alexander's passing, the news of his passing reached the prestigious city-state of Athens, which triggered the anti-Macedonian demagogues in Athens to begin a full-blooded insurrection against their northern neighbors. Alexander's death had reached Athens within a few weeks of his passing. A formidable alliance of anti-Macedonian Hellenic groups and city-states was under Athens' leadership, and it was led by the city-state of Athens. This Athenian-led uprising would prove to be a major challenge for those who outlived Alexander, because it would be supported by their own army and navy that had been revitalized. Unrest also broke out in Bactria, Sogdia, Thrace, and Cappadocia, which are all located further afield. The fragile fabric that had held most of Alexander the Great's empire together unraveled almost immediately after he passed away. The following is the account of the crisis that developed after his passing away. Widespread rebellion. Besides the revolt in Athens, there was trouble in other places after Alexander died. The powerful Odrysian king Xuthus III had broken free from Macedonian rule in Thrace, which is mostly modern-day Bulgaria. He declared himself an independent monarch with more than 30,000 troops. Ariarathes, an independent Iranian warlord, ruled over Cappadocia and was able to call up about 50,000 troops. At the same time, in Bactria Sogdia, which is now northern Afghanistan and southern Uzbekistan, more than 20,000 unhappy veteran Greek hoplites were about to rise up and march several thousand miles back to their homes in the Mediterranean. Alexander had sent them there 5 years before to guard this faraway border. Alexander's successors. In the latter half of the year 323 BC, Alexander's reign was plagued with widespread rebellion, but who would be responsible for putting up with these uprisings? Alexander's previous adjutants bore the responsibility for what happened. Generals such as Pricus, Ptolemy, Paethon, and Craterus were among those who had accompanied Alexander on his military expeditions in the past. These were the generals who had been essential to Alexander the Great's success in securing his victories and conquests. From the old viceroy Antipater in Macedonia to the one-eyed veteran politician Antigonus in Phrygia, central Turkey, everyone played an important role in their own countries. After Alexander's death, many of these individuals rose to prominence and took over the leadership of the empire. To all intents and purposes, they were subservient to Philip Aridaeus III, the new ruler of the empire. Alexander the Great's older half-brother, Philip Aridaeus III, was known as Philip Aridaeus III. However, Philip struggled with a medical issue. Because of this disease, which we are unable to identify, he was unable to govern on his own and required assistance to do so. In subsequent years, in addition to Philip Aridaeus, a second king was crowned. This was King Alexander IV, who had been named after Alexander the Great's young son. Alexander was still a young man when he assumed the throne, so he too was unable to rule effectively without assistance. Due to all of these factors, the kings were reduced to being little more than symbolic heads of state. They were merely figureheads for the monarchy. Their power was symbolic. The prominent politicians officially beneath them, the generals who had outlived Alexander the Great, held the real power. Quashing unrest. These generals were extremely self-assured men due to the fact that they had served alongside Alexander the Great and had played key roles in a number of triumphs. They conjured up the authoritative manner of Alexander the Great. They were in the vanguard of the charge. They were willing to take the dangers that their warriors did. They were extraordinary leaders in terms of both capability and charisma. Never before, in fact, did Macedonia or any other nation abound with such a large number of brilliant men. Philip II, first and then Alexander, had selected these men with such care that it seemed as if they were chosen not so much to accompany them to battle as to succeed them on the throne. Never before, moreover, did any country abound with such a large number of outstanding men. Who then can marvel that such officers were able to conquer the world, when it seemed as though the army of the Macedonians was being commanded not by generals, but rather by princes? After the death of Alexander the Great's king, some of these princes were given the responsibility of putting an end to the turmoil that broke out over the empire of Alexander the Great. Antipater and Craterus would fight the Athenians, Lysimachus would go up against Xerxes III in Thrace, Python would put a stop to the Bactrian uprising, and Perdiccas would take on Ariarathes. It was a time marked by strife and warfare across the entirety of what had been Alexander the Great's realm. Internal threats. At the end of the 323 BC, the Macedonian Empire faced a variety of challenges from the outside world. However, internal problems were beginning to surface as well. There is some doubt regarding the allegiance of these distinguished men, whom Justin praises so highly. The individuals who outlived Alexander the Great as a general were remarkable in their own right. They were remarkable in every way. On the other hand, they lacked humility and craved authority. These generals had shown that they were willing to serve under Alexander the Great and the aura that surrounded him. They were less inclined to serve under one of their fellow commanders than they had been previously. Very quickly, many of these adjutants came to the realization that the greatest obstacles to their imperial ambitions in this new world post-Alexander were coming from their old comrades in arms. This realization came very rapidly. It came through their fellow adjutants, many of whom were willing to disobey official directives in the years immediately following 323 BC in order to pursue their own authority. This was the source of the information. Several illustrative examples of this can be found. One of the best examples is the vicious competition that arose between Ptolemy and Perdiccas almost immediately. Who was Perdiccas? Perdiccas was the most senior subordinate serving under the king of Babylon at the time that Alexander the Great passed away. Perdiccas was the recipient of Alexander's signet ring, as stated by the Roman historian Quintus Curtius Rufus. Alexander gave the ring to Perdiccas just before he passed away. Alexander's actions here indicate that he was not designating Perdiccas as his successor. The most likely interpretation of Alexander's actions is that he was designating Perdiccas as the man to oversee the succession. Perdiccas's high standing when Alexander died ensured that he played a crucial role in the volatile events that soon seized Babylon, when the Macedonian veteran soldiers and the generals found themselves at odds with one another over the succession. This was the case regardless of the significance of the event itself. In the end, it was Perdiccas who emerged as the undisputed winner of this Babylon crisis. He had a crucial part in putting an end to the unrest by using a variety of tactics, including coercion, compromise, and persuasion. As a direct result of this, he eventually emerged from the crisis as the most powerful figure in the empire. He was given the title of prostates, which is equivalent to the role of regent. Perdiccas was the one who served as the de facto ruler of the Macedonian Empire on behalf of King Philip Aridaeus III, who was powerless to do so. But Perdiccas's authority was immediately questioned, most notably by a person named Ptolemy. This occurred extremely swiftly. Who was Ptolemy? Ptolemy was another general who had served under Alexander the Great, just as Perdiccas. Ptolemy's name comes from the Greek word for lion. He was also there in Babylon at the time of Alexander's death, and had a part in the crisis that quickly developed in the city after Alexander's passing. However, his assistance to Perdiccas during this crisis was contingent on meeting certain requirements. Ptolemy had a healthy amount of skepticism regarding Perdiccas and his aspirations. Ptolemy had requested a certain position within the Macedonian Empire in exchange for his assistance, and he had received it. He made his desire to become the governor of a prosperous province in Egypt. Perdiccas gave his assent, but only on the condition that Ptolemy appoint Cleomenes, the previous ruler of Egypt, to the position of Ptolemy's deputy. It would indicate that Cleomenes worked as an informant for Perdiccas, providing him with information regarding Ptolemy. Ptolemy, on the other hand, had no intention of upholding his end of the bargain. In the year 322 BC, almost immediately after he had arrived in Egypt, he had Cleomenes murdered. Then, Ptolemy got to work expanding his army's capabilities. He secured the services of mercenaries, constructed defenses along the Nile River, negotiated peace treaties with neighboring kings, and enlarged his kingdom by conquering the prosperous region of Cyrenaica. Ptolemy was able to accomplish all of this despite the fact that Perdiccas did not give him permission. Ptolemy was instrumental in establishing Egypt as a great military stronghold during this time. The area was rapidly developing into a formidable core for a potential Ptolemaic empire. Perdiccas and Ptolemy clash. By the year 321 BC, it appeared as though a confrontation between Perdiccas and Ptolemy was about to take place, and conflict soon followed. In the latter part of the year 321 BC, Ptolemy and his allies pulled off one of the strangest robberies in the annals of history when they took control of Alexander the Great's talismanic body and burial coach from Perdiccas. This remarkable provocation was engineered by Ptolemy. The body of Alexander was more than just a corpse when it was found. In the world that had developed during Alexander's reign, this new symbol of authority was extraordinarily potent. Whoever held it had a significant deal of influence throughout the empire. The fact that Ptolemy took the body while it was still in Perdiccas's grip was a challenge that the general was unable to refuse. The corpse was also an important part of Perdiccas's own plans to become an imperial ruler. It was imperative that he retrieve the body. That event was the spark that ignited the First Successor War. It wasn't even 2 years since Alexander the Great passed away before the first of the turbulent successor wars was on the horizon. In the immediate wake of Alexander the Great's death, the Macedonian Empire faced a number of serious external dangers. These threats had proven to be many. The deadly rivalries that concurrently developed between ambitious Macedonian leaders ultimately masked the threats that they posed to the Macedonian people. For the following 40 years, what was Alexander's empire would be plunged in massive, intermittent Macedonian-led civil wars, the so-called Wars of the Successors. These conflicts would be headed by Macedonia. The contentious connection that existed between Ptolemy and Perdiccas is just one example of the many tragic feuds that characterized this time of history. There are a great number of others, such as Eumenes versus Neoptolemus, Python versus Peucestus, Perdiccas versus Antigonus, Polyperchon versus Cassander, and so on. The bloody conflict that raged between Perdiccas and Ptolemy was a portent of events to come. The successor wars turned into an early version of Game of Thrones, as comrades in arms turned into the most despised of adversaries in their quest to acquire the most power in the uncertain world that emerged after the reign of Alexander the Great. However, there is one point that cannot be disputed. The anarchy of the time makes for fascinating, if slightly unsettling, reading. We hope you like this video, subscribe to the channel if you're a history addict, and please let us know about what civilization or time period we should talk about. Also, watch another video here.